The hospital chamber was cloaked in a silence so profound it almost pressed against the skin, interrupted only by the fragile metronome of the heart monitor. Evelyn, a nurse tempered by 2 decades of endurance, anchored herself beside the bedside of Richard Harrow, a billionaire whose identity was engraved into skylines and philanthropic wings. His hand, skeletal and chilled, clutched hers with desperate insistence, as though her touch alone tethered him to existence. The acrid tang of disinfectant clung to the air, yet Evelyn's gaze never drifted from his face, carved with years, burdened with exhaustion, undeniably human. "Evelyn?" His voice rasped, raw and brittle, scarcely rising above a whisper. "Have you ever considered what lingers when everything else is stripped away?" She hesitated, not because she hadn't heard such murmurs before, but because this was different. Countless patients had confronted mortality with words like these in the shadowed hours of night. But Richard was not just any man. He was one who had dined with presidents, one who had purchased horizons and islands, one who had measured his life by the architecture of power. And now, humbled in a faded hospital gown, he peered at her as though she guarded the last truth. "I think of it often," she murmured at last, steady but hushed. "It's not wealth. It's not the applause. It's the ones who don't abandon you when the lights finally dim. Love. Family. Those rare souls who stay." A brittle laugh escaped him, dissolving into a cough. "You're wiser than I ever allowed myself to be." Evelyn lifted his pillow, her hands tender yet deliberate, honed by years of soothing aches and steadying dying breaths. Since 25, she had worn the armor of a nurse, an African-American woman in a realm that too often withheld space for her. She had borne the skeptical stares, endured the unspoken prejudices, tended to patients who recoiled at her presence, yet she had remained resolute because this, holding a faltering hand, easing a fractured soul, was stitched into her marrow. Richard's gaze, dim but unbroken, sought hers. "My life was a chase. Money, power, objects that gleamed but never warmed. And now I see my little girl's face, the way she laughed at 5 in the park. I see my wife's smile before—" His voice cracked under the weight of absence. Evelyn's grip tightened, anchoring him. "Don't crucify yourself, Mr. Harrow," she answered, her voice a firm kindness. "You did what you thought was right in the moment. All of us stumble through choices." He shook his head slowly, a tear charting a path down his worn cheek. "No, Evelyn. I erected towers, but I never raised a home. I scattered millions toward strangers, but withheld the currency of time from the ones who truly mattered." The air itself seemed to constrict, walls pressing inward with the gravity of his confession. Evelyn's own chest ached beneath it. She thought of her son, who waited for calls that never came because she drowned in double shifts. She thought of her sister, promised visits that dissolved into exhaustion. Her throat tightened, though her face remained steady for him. "You're awake to it now," she told him. "You're seeing it before the curtain falls. That's more than most are ever granted." His fingers slackened, the strength ebbing like tide retreating. The monitor's cadence faltered. "Evelyn, tell them. Tell my daughter, tell my son, that I'm sorry, that I loved them, even if I wore my pride like armor too heavy to lift." "I will," she whispered, her voice thick with unspoken grief. "They'll know. I promise." A faint smile ghosted across his lips, weary yet unburdened. "You're good, Evelyn. Far better than a man like me deserved at the end." His eyelids lowered, and the steady beeping dissolved into one long, merciless note. Evelyn remained still, her hand enfolding his even as the whirl of nurses and physicians surged around her. She relinquished her place only when the truth became undeniable. Death was no stranger to her, but this carried the sting of regret sharpened to a blade. Hours later, in the muted solitude of the break room, she sat before a cup of coffee gone cold, her stare hollow against the wall. His words gnawed at her. She thought of the people she herself had filed away for later, as though time was ever merciful. Her fingers trembled as she retrieved her phone and pressed a number she had too long ignored. "Hey, baby. Can you spare this weekend? I miss you." That was the story, as it was shared with me by a friend who walks hospital corridors for a living. It isn't polished, it isn't perfect, but it is raw and it is real. Maybe it nudges you the way it unsettled me, to remember what remains when the titles, the buildings, the applause all dissolve. If it strikes you, pass it on. Sometimes we need a reminder. Life isn't forever, and love is the only empire that endures.